Hi, this is Marlene, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Go to MarlenePardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Strange Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing today? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. Everything is great. As you know, still trudging along in my new home up in North Florida. For those of you, last week I had mentioned that I had lost one of my roosters. Yes, I did. But, you know, like Dr. Malcolm said in Jurassic Park, life always finds a way. Some of you might be familiar if you've been with the show for a while. I have guinea hens that they make that weird noise. Well, I only had two of them. One of them I brought up with chicks, and the other one I found out later that they kind of pick on chickens. I mean, in other words, they're bullies. But anyway, to make a long story short, they're so quaint and unusual that I've kept them, especially my male. And he all of a sudden, I have very large trees with big roots in the property. And there was a board that we had placed there, basically making like a small cover. Next thing I know, I uncovered because I was going to move something. And there's my guinea sitting on top of about 20 eggs. And the thing is, this is the first time they've ever nested. And I had never pursued it because I had read that they're really not that good as far as parents because they kind of abandon their nest sometimes. But I'm going to let it go through. So my point being, I lost a rooster, but now I have a guinea hen, which is for the first time, has sitting and trying to hatch. I don't know how many eggs are going to come out of there. So that's going to be interesting, and I'll keep you guys updated on that. And the truth is, at this point, since she kind of snuck that in me, have you noticed all my chickens and things, they kind of do that to me? You know, they kind of sneak in and do the, I'm going to raise some chicks. I really don't know when they're going to hatch. They usually follow the timelines of, you know, chickens, 20, 21 day, 22. But at this point, I have no idea how long she's been on the egg. So I've got to run out there and scoop them up because that is the problem out here. As a matter of fact, we have a neighbor that's got property way over it. And he has a few chickens. And I heard from another neighbor, because you know how that travels around. Forget the phone. It's word of mouth, that there was a fox running around and had taken a few of this guy's chickens because he couldn't keep them in a coop. He can't catch them. All right. But I don't know where they roost, but bottom line, he had lost a few of his chickens to a fox that came in. So now I'm like wigged out because I don't want to lose. Not only do I not want to lose the guinea, I don't want to lose my chick. So I'll keep you guys abreast of that. And then let's get on to the good part. Yes, I know this is a story about paranormal, supernatural, things of that nature. But, you know, I always interject about my adventures in the chicken kingdom. Let me first of all get on to the sponsor for the show, which is Primary Notary Services. And this company works in the state of Florida, the entire state of Florida. And what they do is they provide full notary services at your convenience when you need it and where you need it. And what they do is they travel to your location at a time that is suitable for you. They're fast, friendly, reliable, and above all, they are professional. And they keep your privacy in mind. They're mobile. They can provide these services throughout the state of Florida. They can assist with immigration forms. They do a virtual assistant services, title processing. They can officiate at your wedding. They also have remote online notary services, which means that they can notarize documents online. They also have a bilingual staff, English, Spanish, and all their notaries are background check, which means certified, bonded, and insured, and they're available 7 days a week after hours. All of these things, especially for people sometimes that need to have a last minute notary, sometimes at hospitals, very unusual places. So give them a call at 844-423-7773. Again, the name is Primary Notary. They can be reached at 844-423-7773 or email them at hello@primarynotary.net. Now, since we got that out of the way, let's get on to the good part, which is who I have as a guest. And this is the first time that this gentleman comes to Stories of the Supernatural. And I know you're going to be very excited when I go ahead and let you know a little bit about him. His name is Dr. Piero Calvi-Parisetti. He's Italian-born and Scottish author and speaker. He's a medical doctor, originally specializing in public health and disaster management. In 2004, a simple anecdote narrated by his wife triggered an intellectual interest at first, and then a truly scholarly passion for psychic research, especially for the study of scientific evidence pointing to the survival of human personality after bodily death. He's personally trained with his intellectual hero, Dr. Raymond Moody, which I'm sure many of you might be familiar with, which he was the first physician to write about near-death experiences back in 1975. Dr. Parisetti's become convinced that mind and consciousness cannot be reduced to the activity of the brain, and in a way which we do not understand, it survives the death of the body. In 2008, he published his first book, 21 Days into the Afterlife, hailed by New York Times bestselling author Michael Prescott as the best introduction I have seen to the survival hypothesis. The book received very complimentary reviews by specialists and lay public alike, is translated to 6 languages, and went on to become an internet publishing success. He has other books, which are Adventures in Psychic Research and Apparitions, Proof of Survival from 2014. And I'd like for you to help me welcome Dr. Parisetti. How are you doing today? Hello.
I am very well, Marlene. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all your listeners who've made time to listen to what I have to say.
Everybody, all my guests sometimes listen to my chicken stories, but I have my audience. I've been raising chickens since I even lived in Miami. One of those things I even transported a bunch of chickens, and people, they're part of the background of my show because people follow it along like a soap opera kind of thing. But anyway,
fantastic.
When you mentioned, I remember reading Dr. Moody's books many years ago, where it was so groundbreaking because he conducted it. His observations were basically almost, you want to say, at a scientific level.
Completely.
As a doctor.
Absolutely.
He didn't want to prove it or disprove it. He just wanted to get the data, analyze it, and then basically he came to the conclusion that that there is something beyond the physical. In other words, that's when we had people that were being able to describe things going on, either seeing their bodies while they were being worked on, seeing events, or people in other parts of let's say the hospital. And it was, I believe that it was groundbreaking what he described. And I imagine that now, especially after 1975, that now they have more ways of basically bringing people back, for lack of a better word. Have you found in your research that some of those incidents, as far as the reports, have become more common?
Not necessarily. NDEs, near-death experiences, is one of the pillars, but by no means the only one. When people here that I'm a medical doctor and I dabble in the survival, they always say NDEs, and NDEs are super important.
Yes.
But that's very sort of associated with the medical profession and the medical field. But NDEs are one of about, I would say, 12 different fields of investigation, scientific investigation, all coherently and consistently pointing to the survival of personality to physical death. Now, concerning NDEs, what can I tell you? The Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, which is the reference book, the scientific reference book used by health professionals who want to know about this phenomenon, was published already a few years ago under the very learned editorship of Edward Kelly. And the book has 140 peer-reviewed scientific papers in the bibliography. So we went way beyond the anecdotal and we went into completely the scientific field. Now, people are obviously struck and their fantasy, everybody's fantasy is struck by the fact that in the ears have this incredible feat. They see themselves, they, as you correctly said, they see and are able to describe the what goes on during resuscitation. They even can describe particular details that they have perceived outside the building where they were being resuscitated, and all that points extraordinarily to the fact that consciousness can operate outside the physical body. However, let me remind you and all our listeners that the more fundamental and truly spectacular feature of the NDEs is that people who have no functioning brain whatsoever have an experience. Whatever kind of experience, that in itself is extraordinary, and that flies in the face of, the materialists and the physicalists who say that mind is only the electrochemical activity of the brain. It's just a matter of neurons and cells.
Okay, so what you're saying is people that their brain is not working.
Not functioning. Nothing. So let me take you on a very short medical ride. It's easy. It's not difficult to follow. Okay? NDEs happen in a variety of situations. However, we often refer to what happens during following cardiac arrest because we know the physiology very well. We know very well what happens to the brain after the heart stops beating. And, the first thing is that in about a second and a half, 2 seconds, lights go out. We lose consciousness. We faint, essentially, right? About 10 seconds after that, the breathing stops. And you know that no heartbeat and no breathing is the medical definition of death, right? So at that stage, the person is dead. Within another 10 seconds, so about 20 seconds from cardiac arrest, the EEG, the electroencephalogram, that's the electrical activity of the brain, goes flat. We speak about flatliners, don't we?
Yes.
So already then the person is clinically and legally dead in that condition. What's really interesting is that within another about 10 seconds, so we are at 30 seconds following cardiac arrest, there are centers very deep into the brain. For instance, the gagging reflex, the fact that if you touch the back of your throat, we inevitably gag. The corneal reflex, if we touch our eye, we inevitably sort of move away and close your eye. These are very, very old, evolutionarily speaking, reflexes that depend on very, very simple connection of neurons very deep into the brain. The fact that those reflexes are out tells us that the brain is out. It is not only the cortex, it is not only the inner part of the brain, the most fundamental processes of the human brain are not functioning. Now, in those conditions, people report a complex, highly structured experience, which they described as more real than reality. And the interesting thing is that this experience is not like, the hallucinations you have when you take LSD or drugs, which can be and you can, dream up all sorts of things. No, as we know already from Dr. Moody's work so many years ago, the experience is fairly common. I'm not saying it's identical for everybody, but people of very diverse sex, race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, whatever you want to throw into the mix, they all have a number of common features. The experience, you and your listeners have heard about this, the autoscopy, living the body, seeing the body, and then entering the tunnel, and the sensation of ascending, and then getting into the light. There's a number of steps which are extraordinarily repeated across cultures, epochs, genders, everything. So, number one, the very fact that people without a functioning brain have an experience is extraordinary. Number two, the fact that very different people report the same kind of experience is even more extraordinary. And now, let me ask you one thing, Marlene.
Yes.
How much do you think you remember from your high school years?
In my conscious mind, very little. My subconscious mind, everything.
Oh, but I'm talking about the notions, what we spent so hard time trying to learn. And
you mean as far as studying?
Yes, yes. Aha.
Isn't it? Unless it's something that I'm using now in present day, very little.
There you are. And I could say the same for university. You spent years painful. I mean, honestly.
Yes.
Anyhow, and you don't remember. Now, possibly the most extraordinary things is that the details of the near-death experience are remembered in minute particulars 20-25 years after the experience. So people without a functioning brain can build and retrieve very detailed memories of their experience.
But
so you understand why...
I guess my question is, usually you hear that when your brain is not functioning, that's it. In other words, that you're like you said, dead. So basically people are being brought back even after their brain is not functioning?
Absolutely. The brain, there's plenty of cases where they have been quote unquote dead for 20-25 minutes. And during that period in which there's no brain activity whatsoever and the person, to clinical terms and legal terms, they're dead, they have these extraordinary experiences. And that's fantastic. And we're not talking of one case or two. In literature alone, there's about 21,000 well-documented cases. And I'm talking about medical literature. Okay, imagine what's not documented, but it still happens. Extraordinary. So it is, in fact, a very common phenomenon.
Let me ask you, so what does that do to someone in the medical field? At which point do they can say, I'm going to pronounce this person dead, considering what you just said?
They have to wait. They have to wait, of course. And if they have ways, we have ways to understand if the resuscitation work is likely to happen or not. And in fact, if the heart restarts, the person comes back to life. If the heart does not start, then unfortunately the person crosses the threshold.
Right.
Finally.
I have heard of people who, like you said, the brain is dead, and sometimes they will keep the body with machines pumping. So if let's say
yeah.
for organ donation, for example.
But it's different. It's different. In that case, the heart works.
Okay.
The heart muscle works. So they might be ventilated with, artificially, they breathe artificially, but the heart works. So they're not dead. They might be quote unquote brain dead, but they're not dead.
Right. Which I always thought was the determining factor whether somebody was truly dead. In other words, if their brain activity was there, but maybe they couldn't breathe on their own and they were being kept alive, they were still alive.
Correct.
But once the brain that was gone, and of course the heart, like you said, then that was when the person was truly clinically dead. And
Correct.
you're telling me that people are remembering. Oh, that's incredible.
It is phenomenal. Listen, I mean, there's a very easy way to sum up all this, Marlene. Virtually all the medical researchers, and now Moody was the first one, and now there's quite a number who've devoted all their lives to the in-depth study of the near-death experience. They're all convinced that it is, quote, highly suggestive of life after life, end quote.
Yes, I believe it. When you think of that, and then you hear these stories exactly like what you said, the near death, the tunnel, where they're sometimes even given a choice.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you
want to return? Or
there's the life review typically, which again is dead, not against, but I mean is incompatible with the teachings, at least of the Christian religion, which speaks about a judgment, and there's one God that's there either to you're either damned or saved, and blah blah. Not at all. What consistently we are told, both by NDEers and by spirit communicators talking to us through mediums and other channels, plenty of other channels, consistently they tell us that what we go through is in fact a life review. We are made to relive every single instant of our life. They say it's a three-dimensional cinema. You relive your life at incredible speed. You rethink all the thoughts, you refeel all the emotions, and you are conscious of the effect of your actions on others.
On others, yes.
And you yourself do the judging. You're helped reflecting on what happened in your life, and the exercise is not meant to issue a judgment. The exercise is meant to learn.
Right. And a lot of people I know, depending on the religions, there's connotations of punishment. In other words, we're going to get in other words, the best, even with, let's say, Christian, is purgatory, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to go either up or down.
This is not what we hear. Not what we hear from people who died when they were Christians.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Interestingly, and with this I will conclude, and maybe we can move to other subjects, because there's plenty I can talk to.
Yes.
But another very interesting feature of NDEs is that the people who've had them come back transformed.
Yes.
There's an array of psychological and behavioral changes, which again appear immediately after the experience and last a lifetime. People lose their fear of death, for instance, because they have died. They have experienced first person what happens afterwards. So any fear of death is gone. If anything, they long to go back to, because
have you come across, which I always wonder about, a person that's a true atheist? By this I mean, I don't mean an agnostic. I mean a true atheist that doesn't believe at all that there is anything beyond the physical body, that they've come back. Have you read of any information that they're transformed in their belief systems?
Absolutely, and I cannot quote now on top of my mind examples, but what's as part of these changes, psychological and changes in behavior, what's interesting is people who were religious before the experience become less religious and more broadly spiritual.
Okay.
They lose touch with the dogma, with the details of their tradition, whatever, Christian or whatever it is, and they embrace a much more open, broad spirituality, and that's really interesting. People lose any interest in material possessions, in success in the material world, and they develop an interest for knowledge for its own sake, for helping others. It's extraordinary. It's a very beneficial thing. I mean, dying
Right.
and
No,
coming
I've
back
heard
is good.
that it yes, that overall it's a good experience for the people that decide to come back for whatever the reasons.
Uh-huh.
And like you said, their outlook on life has totally changed, no matter what they were like before.
Yes,
The
indeed.
experience.
Indeed. Absolutely.
And so let's go on. You were saying about other areas.
Yes,
let me.
I hope you and especially your listeners will forgive me for a little bit of self-promotion, but I've embarked in a project. I make no mystery, Marlene, of the fact that the recent pandemic took a toll on me. It affected all of us, for sure, and everyone in their own way. And I took it really badly. I had a bout of mild to serious depression and anxiety. It was a dark period. Nevertheless, being the good soldier that I am, I tended to my interests. And during that period, I managed to research and write an entirely new book.
Oh, what a great way to make use of the time. Yes, this is excellent.
Well, you know, and I must say I am modestly proud of it, because it's a slightly different take on the subject of, how could you say, the geography of the afterlife. Let me try to explain. In Europe, we have a very, very popular, I don't understand why they're not popular in the US, but I understand they're not. In Europe, they are very popular. Travel guides called Lonely Planet. And they've been going for years and decades now. And Lonely Planet guides are based on the accounts actually sent by travelers. Somebody goes to Thailand as a backpacker, comes back, writes a report, sends it to the headquarters in the Netherlands, saying, I've stayed at this hostel, this was good, and I suggest you go there because it's cheap and blah, blah, etc.
Right.
Another person with more means also goes to Thailand and sends back a report on the luxury resort and blah, blah. And so they collect and collate.
Excellent.
It's a beautiful thing. And every year there's an updated version because they receive more reports. So it's a very good system. So I had the idea of compiling the Lonely Planet Guide to the afterlife, to the Lonely Planet Guide to what happens to the process of dying, death, and what comes afterwards. And to do so, I looked at the testimony we received from 3 categories of sources. Number 1, Deathbed Visions. And I will explain to you in a moment what they are. Number 2, near-death experiences, which we've discussed superficially, but now we have an idea what they are. Number 3, after-death communication, the testimony we receive from people who allegedly have died and speak to us through a variety of channels. The best known is mediums, but there are many others: instrumental transcommunication, electronic voice phenomena, automatic writing. There's a number of ways in which for now 200 years we have collected evidence about after-death communication. So, since I am a man of science myself and a man of reason, I don't want my readers to take such testimony at face value. So the first part of the book is a sort of a CSI, crime scene investigation. It's a sort of as a medical detective investigation into these three sources. We described the phenomenon, we looked at what the phenomenon indicates, we critically examine all possible alternative explanations. Okay? And at the end, we rationally conclude that it is reasonable to believe them. It's reasonable to believe that NDEers are who they say they are. People who have momentarily died, went into the afterlife, took a look, and came back. And we have reasons to believe that Deathbed Visions, which is a fabulous and marvelous phenomenon I'll talk to you about in a moment,
Yes.
that these are really momentary peeks into what awaits people after their passing. And we have all reasons. The evidence is colossal. The evidence has been for after-death communication has been gathered for and studied for, I would say 180 years now by some of the finest minds on the planet, including, hear me well, 5 Nobel Prize winners. And the only conclusion an unbiased observer who has engaged with the evidence can draw is that, yes, these are discarnate entities who once walked planet Earth and now go on existing in a non-material dimension we call the spirit world. So collating and representing, not regurgitating, because I use a lot of the quotes themselves, but it's not a book only of quotes. It's a book that, I provide the quotes, I provide the references, but there's a bit of explanation and framework from me. The book is called Step into the Light, and it's available as usual on Amazon, and I invite everybody who's listening and wants more information or wants to make contact with me to visit drparisetti.com. Dr as doctor, and then one word, Parisetti, Paris like the city in France, ETTI at the end, drparisetti, drparisetti.com. Now, and there you find my books, you find free articles, the Apparitions book is there for free, people can download it for free, and blah blah. Now, back to Deathbed Visions. Have you ever heard about this?
Yes.
You did.
This is about, are we talking about people that are dying that see the deceased relatives? Right. Precisely. I mean, I've even heard of nurses that work that they know almost when someone's going to pass.
The subject is so important that it is taught at nursing school. There's a subject at nursing school because nurses have to be prepared. Then they decide themselves what they make about the phenomenon, but they are prepared to deal with people who report having these visions.
Yes.
Now, a few interesting facts about this. About 10% of people are conscious at the moment of their passing. Okay? 1 in 10, more or less. Of this 10%, 2/3 report visions of what appears to be the afterlife. They interact with people who are said to be relatives who have come to bring them over to the afterlife. That in itself is extraordinary, okay? What happens, this happens in the 36 to 48 hours before passing. Somebody who's been in pain and slumped in bed for maybe weeks with terminal disease or what have you, all of a sudden is seen to perk up, sit up in bed,
heard of that.
Raise their hands, and they talk about something that only they can see, except the rare cases of shared death experiences. But we want to go into that. They describe, heavenly realms, and then they say, "Oh, here's that," and they engage in conversation, sustained conversation, and they their faces lit up, and it's an extraordinary, it's very transformative experience. And then they go. Now, obviously, it has been, the skeptics and the materialists have tried to explain away the phenomenon in a number of ways. And those who will have the patience of going through the chapter in my book, they will see that none of these explanations stand up to facts. They are medically, scientifically debunked. The debunkers are debunked because, sorry, it doesn't work like that.
Yes.
We don't have time to get into that now, but let me tell you two things which are truly extraordinary. Oh, now I only remember one, and I said two. Let me start with
No,
one.
don't worry. Go ahead. Go with it.
So, the idea that deathbed visions are fantasies, a desire, something that a story that we invent to ourselves, that our psyche somehow invents to give us comfort at the moment of death, is blown out of the water by this simple fact. Evidence shows that those who think they are going to die but end up making a recovery don't have deathbed visions.
Right.
Those who think they will make a recovery but end up dying do have deathbed visions. That's extraordinary. It's hard evidence.
It happens despite what the expectations are.
Absolutely. It's hard evidence telling us that it is proximity to the death of the physical body, which is the trigger for the experience. It is like, the physical brain was a filter that excludes a lot that we only see what's important for life on earth and material and evolution and blah blah. But when we come close to death, that filter opens and we are allowed to see what happens. Yes, now I remember what the other pretty intriguing particular. We say that those who have deathbed visions engage in communication. They talk to relatives, or more rarely to spiritual figures, but generally it's relatives, dead relatives. That includes a non-negligible number of very well documented cases in which the person having the vision speaks to somebody they did not know he or she was dead at the moment the vision is had. And this is fantastic. How do you explain that?
Right. They have
other than the fact that somehow, in a way, I keep saying, I do not have explanation for these things, right? I'm not one of those who say, oh, there's a quantum field. Or the honest answer is that we do not know. We only know it happens. And the fact that it happens point to survival of personality to physical death.
And I've even heard of patients that sometimes have dementia and Alzheimer's become lucid.
Oh yes, terminal lucidity, absolutely.
As far as recognizing in that conversation that you're talking about,
I had a snippet of that experience personally with my wife's mother, who poor woman died with a very severe Alzheimer, and I would not say she regained lucidity, but the poor woman, the only thing she would say for the last few months of her life would be, Jesus, have mercy. That's all she could say. And the afternoon before she eventually passed, she talked about seeing Paddy. But then my wife reflected and probably she said Daddy.
Okay.
And not Paddy. And so there were a few things. So it's not a major case. I think it was just a brush for us, but we saw it first person. Yes. That was interesting. So, if I may, please make abstraction from my own book. But what is interesting is that if you look at the testimony of deathbed visions, near-death experiences and spirit communicators, it is consistent. They all describe the same things in a consistent, coherent manner. So that's even more interesting, because when you have different sources completely independent of each other, different processes approaching death, temporarily dying, or dying and that's it, and they all describe the same steps, the same things, it is super interesting and super, for me, evidential, frankly.
Right, of course. These are not people that could collude to say, we're going to say the same version of the
Hello.
story. And they're like, no, it's because you said different backgrounds, different
Completely.
ethnicities, whatever,
Completely.
countries, as far as even cultural expectations of what dying
Totally.
is.
Totally.
They describe
Totally.
the same thing. And now what do you think happens to people when they die
Mhm.
and they become trapped? In other words, you know, you talk about the near-death experience, which is where maybe loved ones come and guide you and tell you, come, there's nothing to fear. Then you hear, like you said, where you have spirit communication after death.
Yes.
Where you have human spirits, whether it's fear of what you said, judgment,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe, I don't know, or I've even heard people sometimes that die when they're under anesthesia or unconscious or violently, that they don't realize
Yes.
that they died.
Remember the medieval Christian prayer saying, God save me from a sudden death.
Yes.
Because we need to die prepared. Right. Let me take a long way home to answer your question, which is certainly relevant, but it's part of a bigger thing. And let me, again, I mean, if you look at the second part of Step into the Light, then we look at the stages. What happens before, what happens at death, what happens afterwards, and the many stages that follow. And it is always my pleasure and my desire to share a couple of messages of comfort and hope before I answer your question, because two of the great fears, well, the great fear is ceasing to exist. Right? Death equals annihilation. That's not true. That is obviously, blatantly not true in general. Then the two sub-fears concern the idea of dying alone. A lot of people are dead scared of, when I die, I don't want to be alone and blah, blah. Well, we're not. If we are to believe Deathbed Visions, we die surrounded by, if we don't die suddenly or in particular circumstances, you know, a quote-unquote normal death happens with the comfort and the love and the support of our loved ones, and failing that, we have spiritual guides or higher beings who come and help us through. So that's very comforting, I think. The other comforting message is that from the point of view of consciousness, awareness, the moment of passing is a non-event. Some people are terrorized, maybe death is painful, it's a terrible experience. Death is a non-experience. It is, the people feel a almost dramatic difference when they die in pain, or they cannot breathe, or they have some cancer pain or something, and all of a sudden all that goes. Right. And say, what's going on here? I could not breathe a moment ago. I was in atrocious pain, and all that is gone. That is the only signal that the transition has happened. For most people, the continuity is such that, as you correctly said, some do not realize they actually have died. Okay? And for many, the first few moments in the early afterlife, so to speak, are a little confusing, are a little bewildering, because the early days in the spirit world, we maintain the sensation of a physical body, although we don't. It's based on memory. We don't know, but the fact is that people say, how can I feel so alive, and can I feel so myself, and I see my body lying on the deathbed, and so it is a little confusing. However, from there onwards, there are quite a number of steps, which we will not describe now because it would take time. The point, and here eventually I come to answer your question, is that imagine you're at the bottom of the sea, and imagine there's a tiny bubble of air. What happens to that bubble?
It travels upward.
Can it do anything else?
No.
There you have a very good metaphor for the travel of souls in the afterlife. For some, the movement is smooth and quick and fast through the various stages, through the various levels of increasing less materiality, less physicality, and more spirituality. People say in higher vibrational states. I don't know what that means. It's again, it's a metaphor. But what I'm saying is that the levels of the afterlives differ in the fact that they're less physical and they're more spiritual, and we all go upwards and onwards, and we cannot do neither us nor the circumstances we died in can do anything for that. It happens that somebody who for instance, I mean, people who have a strong attachment to earthly things, to material things, for instance, or somebody who's attached to power, or somebody who's an alcoholic or a drug addict. Unfortunately, we don't become saints and perfect people just by dying. You know,
a lot of people think that you grow wings.
It is not the case. It will eventually happen, but there's a process to get there. So let's put it this way: certain bubbles get to the surface very quickly, others take more time, and they may remain quote unquote stuck, and we speak about earthbound spirits and all that. Right. And there too, we are told there are helpers and guides who you are sent to help people in their natural, inevitable, organic process of ascending. That
because
will
I
eventually
imagine even
happen.
at that point, we always still have free will as far as that process.
We do, but then again, those who will have the goodness of reading the book will read the quotes that, you know, a couple of the levels of the afterlife, I call it first heaven and second heaven, that's paradise as we imagine it. It's a most beautiful environment where we meet a lot of people and we gravitate with people with whom we share interests and worldview and you know, wisdom and everything. So we're in a very comforting environment. We keep on doing the activities that we did on Earth, and scientists keep studying their things, and musicians keep perfecting their art and blah blah. And who could possibly want to live that? Well, we're told that at some stage you grow weary of that, and you feel this pull towards higher spheres, less towards light, towards warmth, towards love, less things and more feelings and more spirituality. It happens. And you say it's a choice, but it's a choice that you're naturally brought to making.
Right, because at some point, I imagine, you realize I don't have a physical body, so all the things I needed when I was alive, as in shelter, clothing, all the things that we attach to, don't matter.
Good point.
But I imagine that it takes a while for that to, because if you live your life, you know, by this, I don't mean you have to be greedy, but we are, the human condition is that we become attached to places, to things, to clothing, to our family, to shelter, food.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
And it takes a while to realize without a physical body, there is no need for any of those things. So
My,
I imagine that's what you talk, the attraction to that lessens.
completely. And then you get attracted by less material things and you soar as inevitably as a bubble does. Yes.
Yes. And that's very, and the thing is, I think that we have those desires or some more fundamental because it's what anchors us to life, which is the way it should be, by the way. So to let go of that anchor takes, I imagine, sometimes a little bit of time.
And it differs from person to person, and always remembering that we're told time and time again that our concept of time does not apply there. So
Which is hard. It's hard
it is hard.
to conceive
Very
that because nowadays we run everything on the clock.
Yes. So many things, Marlene, is that's difficult to come on. I am a Western educated medical doctor. It was hammered into me that all that can possibly exist is matter. If you cannot touch it, if you cannot measure it, it doesn't exist. And therefore, as we said before, that mind, personality, who we are, is simply a matter of neurons and hormones and neurotransmitters and all that. When this stops working, lights out, it's finished, there's nothing. And I took that for granted. And it has been a long and at times a little arduous path to come round and surrender to the evidence. And I keep saying I did not have an experience myself. I came close a couple of times, but through other people, never had one myself. I'm not one of those who I've had an NDE or, I saw the light on the way to Damascus. That's not my incarnation this time. Is about studying, learning, thinking, reflecting. And through that, through looking at the evidence and challenging the evidence and researching and asking questions, I eventually came to the conclusion that, yes, in a way which we do not understand, we go on living.
Now that you mentioned it, I want to go through. You said the incarnation. Do you think that we come back? In other words, that this is what I'm going to do, that this is in a way is a schoolroom or a classroom where we improve what we need to improve.
So this and the next life are both classrooms. And life appears as a gigantic, grand scheme that involves many, many sojourns in the physical plane and many sojourns in the spiritual plane of the afterlife. And this is not going around in circles, We're not at the same level all the time. This is a lot more like a spiral. We keep coming up. Every time we come to Earth, we come with more wisdom, more experience, and we have a different life. And that is somehow, I think, mistakenly interpreted as the karma business.
Right.
No, it's not exactly that. And I don't speak, it's not my wisdom, okay? I mean, don't trust me.
Exactly
this is what we're told. This is what we're told by our sources. And our sources say that this grand scheme of school on planet Earth or other planets or school in the material world, followed by school in the spiritual world, followed by school again at a different level with different experiences. And this keeps going up and up and up until the point where the soul has experienced enough, has grown enough in wisdom where there's no return to school. We can finally, eventually soar back into the ground of being, that universal consciousness. You can call it God if you're a religious person. I use the the word, what a cosmic consciousness, whatever. The ocean of consciousness that generated us as an individual wave, still belonging to that ocean. And as a wave, we have experiences and we transform and we change, and eventually we merge back into the ocean.
Right. Because even the concept of karma, if at that point we are aware of every action, every word, every thought, that there, in other words, there is no hiding from the truth when you're on that point. So you better than anyone would understand what it is that I need to improve or what my intentions were. How's that? What goes on in here? The only one that's inside your skin is you.
Yeah.
So the only one that understands who you are, as far as even a being, even if you're not incarnated, is you. That's it.
No.
So you are your best. Like you said, the karma. If there's anybody that would understand what lessons you need to learn, it would be yourself.
Indeed, but I'm always, there's so much we don't understand. There's so little we understand. For instance, why don't we remember our previous lives? Well, we do, with hypnotic regression and everything, but it's buried and hidden. And why don't we know? Why don't we why don't remember life in the spiritual world and do away with all the suffering and the pain and the fear of death and all that? I don't know. We don't know these things. I must be honest.
I think personally that it would make living life on this plane too complicated for us. I think we might end up in insane asylums because it would just be too much of a distraction having all of that.
Yeah.
It would be like you would be. I want to say that our ignorance is there on purpose as far as actively reminding on a conscious level, past lives, past mistakes. Because we have to think sometimes maybe in prior incarnations, we might have done horrible, terrible things.
Unfortunately, we probably have. I know. Yeah, good point. And unfortunately, pain, fear, and suffering are a necessary part.
Yes.
Of this learning, of this schooling, and since we are biological beings, we would only like to have the happy hormones and be in a state of bliss all the time, isn't it? Unfortunately, it's not to be.
No. I mean, well, and I'm going to mention something real quick. I was a practicing hypnotherapist for many years. I don't do that now, but I did do on occasion past life regressions.
All right.
And you have people that come with expectations saying, I know I lived, Egypt, or I was Scarlett O'Hara, and, the majority of my clients had little, if no, acquaintance with hypnosis. So, there was a process to get them to go down. And I would tell them basically what we're going to ask is for you to see the most appropriate thing for you. And some of them were very surprised to see themselves in the most unusual, simple,
mundane,
basic, nothing. Like they didn't leave a village. They were sheep herder.
You know that, and then, sorry, I'm looking at the time. I will have to leave you and your listeners very soon. But there's because you touched on a very interesting point. What the skeptic says, this past life regression. So everybody says there've been Napoleon or Julius Caesar or whatever, or Queen Nefertiti. Untrue. There's a study, I don't remember, as a woman, as a clinical psychologist in the US during the 80s, and I don't remember the name now, but she looked at as many as 10,000 reports of hypnotic regressions, and she studiously noted...
Was it Louise Ireland Frey?
The name doesn't ring the bell.
Okay. I know there were several, like you said, from that time period, but go ahead.
What she did was to for each regression to note the alleged time period, information about activity, clothes, age, socio-economic distribution, and blah blah, And then she brought this data to historians who essentially confirmed everything. The
Right.
gender balance at different periods, epochs in human history, the number of people who were rich and who were poor corresponds exactly to the number of people who report having been rich or poor, and blah, blah. The activities, the clothing, very intriguing, very interesting.
Right. And people don't realize that until recently, the masses of people lived in anonymity. There is no
Yeah.
way, very, very infrequently would you be able to say to find that person, even if they gave you a full name, because people lived out their lives
Yeah. Oh,
with
absolutely.
no notation,
No record, no nothing.
records, none. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen, though.
Although you certainly know of the Division of Perceptual Studies of the University of Virginia, originally created and headed for many years by Professor Ian Stevenson, and is over 1,000 cases of children who remember past life memories, and he went to extraordinary lengths to document and verify these memories. There's one book, 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation, is very heavy going, because it's a completely scientific book, but wow, I mean, it's
Right.
incredible.
I want to say the first introduction I had to that briefly, because I know you have to go, is I don't know if you're familiar with it. Dr. Weiss wrote it back in the 80s, many lives, many masters. And he describes at the beginning how he was no belief whatsoever in any of this.
I have the book here. Yes, yes. Absolutely. Extraordinary.
And I consider that a very good book, because again, he came from a point of origin that he did not expect or believe in any of this.
Nothing.
On the contrary, he even thought that she was like, he let her go through her hypnosis thinking, okay, that's her imagination. Again, Dr. Parisetti, I want to thank you so much for spending this time. It has been absolutely wonderful to have you here.
Likewise.
And I would love to have you come back in the future when we contact you. And I'm going to have a link of your website on the credits of the show. But for my podcast listeners, if you could repeat again your website address.
That's my family name, which is Parisetti, with the prefix drparisetti.com.
Very good. Excellent. And I know I'm going to be premature in this. Are you thinking of other books?
Yes and no. But I mean, it would be, I would have a very small readership, I think, because I would like to popularize something like 100 scientific studies that fly in the face of materialism, something like that,
Oh, that sounds great.
I know, but I mean, how many people would be interested in that? I don't know.
You want me to tell you what I think? I think that in the face of so much technology, human beings always yearn for the spiritual.
Yeah.
Because we are spiritual beings.
That's true. We are indeed.
Yes, I do hope that you go ahead and write it eventually. And I want to wish you the best of luck.
Are you individually on Facebook, Marlene?
No. I stopped being on Facebook because I was spending too much time.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. I was already proposing a friendship there. So
I was, and I stopped myself. I have been on there for many, many years.
Yeah, no, I understand you perfectly well. Listen, it has been a great, great pleasure.
Likewise.
Please do share a link to the show.
Yes, I will.
That'll be. I'll put it on my website. And anytime you want me back, contact me. It's such a pleasure speaking to you.
Likewise. Take care.
And yourself. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Wow. Let me tell you. Like always, I could talk to him for hours, and we could tell we just touched on basically very lightly on the book and what he's worked on. And I mean, he's been involved in this. And like I said, I remember back in the 70s with reading about Dr. Moody and that's basically where the term near-death experience, NDE, came from. And coming from a doctor, I think and I hate to say this, but you think of him as a trained observer. And like I said, he wasn't looking to prove one thing one way or the other. He was basing it on his experience as a doctor, where he was having patients describe this and this. And I imagine after a while, or he's heard other doctors say that and after a while you realize these people, have no connection, but they're basically describing the same event. And I know that there was one time that there were certain doctors that were saying, no, people, that tunnel and the light and all that, that's produced by certain things that are happening in the brain. And I believe they even had one part where they had, somebody that they were pressing different parts of their brain, when people are conscious. And they would be describing similar to near-death experience. And they would say, no, this is people that have these visions of these near-death experiences. It's just parts of their brain being triggered and whatever's going on with them. But the problem comes in when people having near-death experiences were describing conversations and seeing people in another room down the hall, and let's say in a hospital, where how could you be lying, let's say, in an emergency room or an operating room? Because, people, of course, they describe, where they're looking down on maybe the doctors working on them, or if there's a surgery. Some people say, well, people that, your hearing's going on, and basically you're filling in the blanks visually of what's going on. But it still doesn't explain how people that would have that, let's say, overlooking their body would be able to go down the hall or into another room and describe, what people, maybe family members, were wearing, or conversations. I mean, come on. So in other words, this kind of defeated that, how can I say, that explanation. As far as the near-death experience being something just produced by maybe your brain in distress, or whatever the case might be. Or we could even say at this point, because now that the near-death experience has become more popularized, that you could say, well, people are describing what they think they should be experiencing because of that near-death experience. It's, everybody's heard about it, the tunnel and the light and this and that. Again, there's something there that doesn't jive, again, because if we just bring it down to our bodies organically, our brains, which, by the way, I was floored when he said that thing about basically the brain being dead. No, nothing, blah, blah, going on. And people are still experiencing near death. And I was like, what? Because to me, I always thought that, yes, your heart could stop, but as long as your brain was working, basically you were still alive. And, sometimes they resuscitate people. They basically shock your heart into pumping again, or somebody does CPR, but your brain is still active. And as a matter of fact, I heard that part of CPR is to keep your heart and your thing pumping, so your brain keeps getting oxygen. So, until maybe other measures can be done. And I couldn't believe that about people being basically their brain not registering anything and experiencing near death. That's incredible. That is incredible. And being brought back. Because again, and I'm thinking to myself, maybe once upon a time, people, sometimes you could be resuscitated, but now I know that they have, let's say, for example, more people now know how to perform CPR, or at least a basic type of CPR. With television, people, hear about, hey, people drown, or people choking, Heimlich, all these things that before, once upon a time, it didn't happen. Unless something happened to you and you were lucky enough to be next to a doctor, maybe somebody that knew, chances are that they couldn't resuscitate you. All right. Or even now when you have paramedics that will respond, because, once upon a time, all you had was an ambulance who would try to get you to the hospital where the doctors were, like, right away. But now you have firemen and paramedics that when they show up, they can start basically trying to keep you alive, or administering certain drugs. Of course, communicating with a doctor to help get you to the hands of the doctors so that they can keep working on you. Once upon a time, they didn't have even that. So that's why I wondered, do you have more cases of near death where people that once upon a time would have died, like absolutely died. There was no bringing them back. Now they're saved. There's a way to get them that, like I said, the air, clear their passageways, all these things that we've learned. Because I remember, I learned CPR, during part of my work, but I remember when I had my children, they were very small. I went and I took a specific course just to do CPR to children, because it's a little bit different when you have to do it to children. Because I was so with my kids that I wanted to know that. And when I was growing up, there was nothing like that being taught, or parents were learning about that. Unless you were a doctor or something like that. CPR. You knew to try to save your child, but as far as, how to do it, let's say to children and adults and all. That's what I'm saying. As far as modern times, there's things that we understand that we could do to prolong life, as far as to help that person not die. And that, what he described, where, again, begs the question, what he said, as far as everybody thinks that you're, I don't know if you want to call it self-awareness lies in your brain. Once your brain is gone, bye. Apparently, that's not the case. Can you imagine all these people that have basically paid to have their heads, their brains, put away in I think they're basically iced, so that, they've been sick or they're dying or something, and they've paid to basically keep their bodies. I believe it's only the head or the brain, the head as in alive, not alive, but in, how can I say it, preserved, so that in the future they could be brought back to life, or maybe that there are going to be certain advances in medicine where they will be cured, or I don't know, reattached to a body. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how that works. Or if their whole body. Can you imagine? You're thinking it's all about the brain, and it turns out it's not. Wow. And I had heard, what was it? God, I can't remember if I heard it or I read it, but sometimes I get mixed up in that. There's so much research, where there was a guy. No, I'll tell you what. It was something I heard. And he described where he worked for a funeral home. This gentleman worked for a funeral home. And he was sent to pick up a body or a person that had died. But this person had orders to basically, he had paid to preserve his body. All right. They were going to do everything where they preserve the body. There's certain conditions. I'm not too familiar with it. Anyway, he paid for that, and this guy picks up the body. Apparently, it was like middle of the night. This gentleman passes away, and the next thing he knows, he says that, like a hearse kind of thing. He sees this guy, like he hears him talking, like, what's going on? And he says he's by himself. Basically, to make a long story short, he starts hearing this man that just died, wigged out, because he's realizing that his body is dead, but that he still has that self-awareness of, like, and almost like he could hear the guy, and he says that he was almost ready to jump out of the car and leave it. And he had never had that experience. He says that basically this man realized after the fact, well, you think, that probably after the money he paid, After the money he paid, maybe, which I believe it's up there as far as what you pay when you want to preserve your body. God, what is the word for it? Oh, it slips from my mind right now. I know there's a term specifically for when you preserve your body right after death for basically for resuscitation later, whatever. Can you imagine after maybe you've paid, because I'm sure that it's like you got to pay up front on that. Find out when you're dead. And that, yeah, they could preserve your body or your brain or whatever, but the you that's you, your spirit, your soul, it's not there. It's like, what's going on? Wow. You know what? I wonder what the sales pitch is on stuff like that. I know people will say, Marlene, how do you convince somebody spend thousands of dollars? Okay. And what's the now I'm like I'm going crazy trying to think of the term. Let me see after. No, not embalming. Cryonics. There we go. God, Marlene. Cryonics. All right, and this is according to Wikipedia. All right, and it's okay because it's not a big technical thing here. Cryonics is the low temperature freezing, usually at negative 196 degrees Celsius, a storage of a human corpse or severed head with a speculative hope that resurrection may be possible in the futures. Cryonics is regarded with skepticism within the mainstream scientific community. It is generally viewed as a pseudoscience, and its practice has been characterized as quackery. They've got a picture of somebody being preserved, preparations in 1985. And I'm thinking to myself, how do you sell that to somebody? Because you're thinking, at what point, I mean, this is the future, like, depending, I imagine if you've got something, and I imagine maybe there might be even people that are not really sick, to just they get old and they die, but it's like, I don't want to die. I want to keep on living. I like this life. But by the way, when you bring me back, get me a nice new body. Yeah. That leads you, that's real deep down the rabbit hole as far as where does this stop, as in the physical body, and this, us, the spiritual self person, begin? When do they divide? All right. And I think that what Dr. Parisetti was saying is that I think that all of us at some point fear loss of identity, loss of who we are. And it's good to hear, like, what he said, that there's a process where they kind of like let you do it slowly. Like I said, where you realize I'm human, I'm so-and-so, but all these things that I needed to live my life on that plane, I don't need that anymore because I don't have a body. The need for shelter, warmth, food, clothing, the possessiveness that we have of, like, that's mine, my house, my wife, my husband, my this, my that. That sometimes, depending on your personality, because there's personalities that are more possessive than other, or more ground, I don't know what you want to call it, for you to arrive at that moment where you realize none of that really matters anymore because I don't need it. And I don't want it. I don't desire it. How's that? Because you can tell yourself you don't need it, you don't need it, you don't need it. But if you don't believe that you don't need it, it doesn't matter. It's comes to the acceptance that you realize you understand it. None of those things I had when I was this person doesn't matter. I don't need it. I don't want it. Okay. I don't want it because there's no attraction there. That attraction that binds us to these things when we're incarnated as we are, like this, is not there. It's like, and I want to say, maybe in some cases when you think of people, discarnates, that are bound to the earth plane, it's almost like that desire is like a ball and chain on them. Like he was made that metaphor about the bubble rising, but maybe that bubble can't rise because there's a ball and chain where this person, this spirit, whatever, still doesn't understand or want to accept, or because of circumstances or their personality or a combination of all, that desire is still there. They don't want to let it go. They can't let it go. So basically, they're a human spirit without a body trying to live a human life on this plane, and it just doesn't work. And some spirits, I imagine, takes a while for them to get there, because you can't be wanting to be an incarnated being and be the bubble that rises to the top. Those two things just don't square. And then, of course, we get into, what are ghosts? Are these trapped souls? Are these souls that are confused, don't understand exactly, fearful of what awaits them, maybe because maybe they've been brought up through religious beliefs, or God knows that, when you die, if you've been a bad person, you're going to pay. You're going to be punished for it. In other words, you escaped it in this lifetime, but eventually, or even what he was describing of as karma, and I'm sure, even, you would hear, not so much now because it doesn't happen now, but, when, let's say when the Catholic Church, that you could basically pay to have prayers done for you, and for lack of a better word, you try to buy forgiveness, especially when you were older and you realized, you know what, chances are I was a real scumbag a few years ago when I was younger, but now I hear death knocking on the door and I don't want to go to the hot place, so I'm going to pay for favors, whether it's prayers, masses, intercessions, you name it, donations to the whatever, so that I'm going to make sure the pearly gates are open for me. But that right there is that kind of thinking where, what if you had been that kind of person and you died suddenly? In other words, no time to prepare, to make up for, boy, was I bad. Let me try to mend my ways. Death comes to you suddenly, unexpectedly. There is no moment for you to change. And you think, based on what I've done, there's only one place I'm going to end up at. Is this the personality that holds back, saying, this is not the best place, I'm not really happy? As a matter of fact, it's awful, but I fear more of going to hell, because I want to say that in most cultures or religions or ethnicities, even if they don't call it hell, even when you read these stories about the ancient Egyptians where they would weigh your heart on a scale and a feather, basically, in other words, the message has always been that in the end, in the afterlife, as in that transition period, you're going to get judged appropriate to who or what you did when you were alive. And I could definitely see that as something to make a person, a spirit, say, I don't understand exactly what's happened, but I'm very afraid. Fear is a very good deterrent, by the way. And also fear will motivate us as humans, because remember, at that point, you're still that human being that you were when you were an incarnated being, with all the fears and desires. It's only when you let go of that you can basically ascend. But yeah, we all can get stuck. And then, of course, that's where you get into all these different communications, through people that are mediums, things of that nature, where sometimes there's mediums that contrary to what people think, that, you're just going to get a communication from a spirit, doesn't say your loved ones. A lot of mediums, if you listen to, especially when they're not aware of their powers, that they'll have like a line of dead people coming into their bedrooms. A lot of those dead people, not all the time do they really want, it's not that they want to pass on a message, is that sometimes all they need is either one, to be acknowledged, somebody to hear this, or number two, for somebody to tell them, you can see me, can hear me. What happened? I remember this, but I don't remember anything else. And I'm like lost. I can't understand what happened to me. And I suspect that in some cases, this person probably knows that they're dead. But that's sometimes, especially if you're resistant to it, if you're not ready, if let's say you were young and you were like, that's not fair. You do this thing in your head where I'm not going to accept that. That's the door I'm not going to go through. And sometimes that's when mediums, sometimes they get bombarded with all these spirits, discarnates, all of them, of course, wanting to go to the front of the line, elbow the next one out of the way, to say a message, to find out, hey, you can see me, you can hear me. What happened? I don't get it. I was coming down the road and this happened, or, hey, I need to tell you what happened to me. Oh, whatever. I'm sure a lot of you have heard stories about people who are mediums, who even from childhood, they start getting visited with sometimes seeing horrible things, or in some cases, depending also on their receptivity, experiencing what were the physical symptoms of this person before they died, whether they were sick, or maybe there was some type of trauma, or something that they can actually feel it in their body. And you hear a lot of times where, because sometimes they want to use your body. So now that's a whole nother show. But again, guys, I hope you love this interview with Dr. Parisetti. The subject, I think, is fascinating. I have a lot of great guests coming on. Again, if you want to find links to the shows, to the MP3 files, to the podcast platforms, depending on which ones you go to, miamighostchronicles.com. And if you just want to listen to the podcast version without commercial interruptions, I have links there where you can either listen to the podcast or on the browser, or download the MP3 file without commercial interruptions. Because of course, once you listen to it through the different platforms, some of them, they do have commercial breaks and so on. If you have any stories, any questions, send them to Marlene at miamighostchronicles.com. Again, remember, I have 2 other podcast series, which is Supernatural Story Time, which is scary stories, like campfire stories, stuff like that. Nightshade Diary, which you can find at nightshadediary.com, which is basically me narrating different classic horror and adventure stories. And I will do my plug right now for my new book that's coming out, which is the one after this. Yes, after this, which is Film Noir Murders #2, which the actual title is Hot Dame on a Cold Slab. And basically, it's true crime. It's true crime about different types of crimes that were committed, murders. Some of them are really interesting, and they're all true. And most of these were in that range of years between the First and Second World Wars. Again, I find it fascinating because this is when law enforcement was starting to look at different methods of solving crime. And of course, this was long before DNA, genetic material, anything like that. So basically, 9 times out of 10, the most they had to go on was fingerprints and maybe blood type, depending on when. And even then, it's incredible. But I think you're going to like it. If you're into the true crime, it's the book for you. And I'm hoping to release it September 9th, but I'll give updates on that. And again, guys, I want to thank you so much for being part of my audience. I think that you are all absolutely wonderful. And again, thank you for coming back every week. See you next week.